team looks aligned on the surface but struggles to execute, you might be trapped in artificial harmony. Dr. Laura Gallaher is an organizational psychologist who helped NASA rebuild its culture after the Columbia Shuttle disaster. In this episode, we break down how to build real alignment while clarity without buy-in fails, and how self-acceptance, not self-judgment, is the fountain of growth. You'll leave with the tools to build a team that speaks up, buys in, and actually delivers. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. We discuss ancient wisdom, real-world experiences, and the latest concepts on mastering leadership of self and others. If you're committed to maximizing your life and your impact on the world, you're home. Welcome back to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Laura Gallaher, organizational psychologist, leadership expert, and co-author of The Missing Links, a book that explores the often overlooked elements of building high-performance, human-centered cultures. Laura began her career at NASA, where she was part of the cultural transformation effort following the Columbia Shuttle disaster. That experience sparked a lifetime commitment to helping organizations grow from the inside out. Her work blends behavioral science, deep psychology, and leadership in a way that challenges conventional thinking and inspires meaningful change. I am much looking forward to this conversation, Laura, and I know it's going to be powerful, and I know it's going to help our audience not just focus on how to lead others, but how to be a better leader in their own life and self-leadership. So I'm excited for this. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sean.
Well, let's start there. You pretty early in your career, you jumped right into NASA.
Yeah.
We talk about going to the deep end. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that. How did that all come about?
So I came out to Orlando for graduate school to study industrial organizational psychology. And I was only 2 years in, actually, to my PhD program when I found out from my roommate at the time, who was interning at NASA, that they were hiring organizational psychologists. And I remember saying, the NASA? I was, he was studying engineering, and so that made sense to me that he was working there. But I was like, wait, they're hiring org psychologists? And what I came to find out is, yes, they were hiring org psychologists. And the reason is because when the Columbia accident happened in 2003, the investigation looked into all the technical aspects of what happened, which I might get into a little bit. But they said NASA's culture was to blame for the accident. And just to throw an extra wrinkle into the whole thing of culture is the culprit, NASA had just been rated the #1 place to work in the U.S. federal government just a couple months before the accident. And so my now business partner and my co-author, he was the one that was asked to lead the culture change initiative at Kennedy Space Center. And his background, his PhD is industrial engineering. And he'd worked for NASA for, I think, maybe about 15 years at that point. I don't know. I got to check the math on that. But he was like, this is a great place to work. What do you mean fix the culture? And so it sparked in them really important questions about, well, what is culture? If it's not just making a great place to work. I mean, NASA has literal rocket scientists, Nobel Prize winners, they're the most engaged and dedicated workforce in the US government. And I worked there for about 8 years. I never met a single soul that didn't care deeply about the lives of the astronauts. And so my business partner now, I didn't meet him until I worked at NASA. He learned that org psychology is this whole field that exists to help you understand people's behavior at work. What are all of the invisible forces that are influencing people's beliefs and subsequently their behavior, which ultimately leads to these outcomes? Having a, engaged workforce and, making the employees' lives better by being a great place to work is an insufficient way to define culture. The third missing ingredient here, which is relevant for all companies, is, does your culture actually drive mission success? And obviously, with NASA not being able to return the astronauts home, they were not successful in the mission. And so it was really that sparked them to want to bring org psychologists in. So it wasn't just me. There was a team of us that he hired to come in and work with him on the culture initiative there.
Yeah, so it's interesting you said that. I know you've mentioned in some of your content about, designing culture like an engineer reverse engineers a product.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting because what I've sort of said in my military background is that mission drives culture in the sense that I tried to describe why, in special operations, a Navy SEAL platoon, right? They operate in 30-person platoons all operating the same platoon together all the time, just them on a mission. The average age is like 25. There's all these different factors that go into like what a Navy SEAL platoon is versus I was an Army Green Beret. We operate in teams of 10 to 12. Average age is 30. Everyone speaks a foreign language. And our missions are often, 6 Americans, 100 indigenous forces working on a target. So it's like, there's no precision. It's like the world is gray. We're just trying to get everyone to like solve this complex thing, just trying not to get everyone pointed guns in the right direction. That's a whole different thing.
Yes.
And capability versus 30 people that you've worked in exclusively together. I mean, it's like the types of missions we're expected to do drives the culture we have. And so I kind of think of it that way, but to think of it as, really analyzing it down to reverse engineering and really getting clear on that. So how do companies start? Where do you even start to reverse engineer a culture?
It's totally congruent with what you're saying, though, Sean, because the way that we talk about it with our clients is when you're deciding how you want to design your culture, you want your culture to support the execution of your strategy. And so that's actually one of the first steps that we do is making sure that people are super clear about what the strategy is. I think one of the areas that the military tends to have, a step up or maybe many steps up on private workforce is that like clarity in, what is the mission? What is mission success? A lot of organizations really struggle to be clear enough to actually have alignment. And you need for alignment to exist, we like the Patrick Lencioni definition of this. You need it to be clear, and you also have to have buy-in, which is another kind of cultural difference, right, between maybe military and other types of workforces, including NASA, where the buy-in isn't just like, yes, sir, and a salute. It's like people push back, they resist, they don't get it. If they don't fully buy in, they don't necessarily fully support it. And so they're not executing against that strategy all that well. So all these problems start to come up inside organizations when the strategy isn't clear. But the strategy is something that we actually turn into like design criteria. And so it's totally congruent with your concept that you're describing, which is, the mission actually drives the culture. But because a lot of organizations don't have that clear strategy, they certainly don't have the clear culture, or there's a clear misalignment. If the culture exists in one way, and then there's some sort of shift to the strategy that's going to require people to start to behave differently in order to make it real. This is where that famous expression of culture eats strategy for breakfast comes from. It's not that strategy is not important. It's crucial. It's that culture is going to win if you haven't done the work to align the culture to whatever your strategy is.
So when you say strategy for businesses, are you talking about what are we, because I almost think of it as like, what are we trying to do in the world? Like, I think of strategy as up and out, right? Like, so like, what's out there in the world? What are we trying to change, impact, what are we trying to do in this environment? And so I think of that as like mission and strategy. Is that what you're saying? Like you're trying to identify that first? Like that's what we need to clearly identify?
That's part of it. I mean, we definitely work with clients to help them figure out like what is their highest level purpose, which will stay consistent even over time. We talk about like Kodak is a very famous example of a company that maybe didn't have a clear sense of purpose. They were focused on being about cameras and film instead of a purpose of like helping people capture their memories, right? Which would have maybe let them be more agile. So we'll help them think about their high level purpose. We help them paint a future vision, which is I think what you're talking about. Like what is the change that we're wanting to make in the world? And then we go a level deeper to say then, okay, so let's take a look at where we are, which can be like a classic kind of like SWOT. There's some other tools that we use. And then where we're trying to go, that's that future vision that we've painted. And what does the landscape look like? So how are we positioned right now in order to get us from here to there? And then the strategy, the way that we talk about it is, it's a set of decision-making filters. So you want the strategy to be clear enough that especially leaders, but hopefully everybody in the organization can look at a decision that they have to make, and they can apply those filters and make very consistent decisions despite like no matter what part of the organization they're in, no matter what level they're in, which is going to like help that organization move that much faster from point A to point B.
Yeah, I love that. Like the ability to have some criteria or intent around, what do we stand for? What are we trying to do so that you mentioned being agile, right? So they can make agile decisions inside an organization. One thing kind of to go back for a second that I found interesting was, we can go over the whole thing. You've got this amazing model, this missing links model, and you talk about different components inside an organization. And there's kind of two there's two parts that you identify. So one is around unity, right? And one around diversity. And so as, to some people, because you mentioned before, you just mentioned getting everyone on the same page and aligned and like a common, clear vision, and how in the military, I'm not sure if it's the sort of yes, sir, like I'm all in. I do think that in the military, the one thing that I know I didn't appreciate when I got out into the civilian world after I was in the military my entire adult life from like 18 to 32 was the amount of self-selection that happened for someone to get like on a special forces team. Cause, we had people from socioeconomic diversity, racial diversity, all kinds of diversity, like all over the world coming together. So if you look at sort of maybe standard demographics, in a lot of ways, we were very diverse. And so in my mind, I'm like, I've led diverse teams, but there's this self-selection of like someone signed up to want to be in the military. Then they made it through these things. Then they went to special forces selection. Then they signed up for, it's like this self-selection and filters happened. So we're actually pretty aligned when it comes to like mindset, values, and some other things, which allowed us to do some amazing, amazing things. But is that unity component and the diversity component, are those opposing? Are those different things?
Love this question. So I would say like yes and no. The way that we look at it is that too many organizations think that they have unity when they actually have artificial harmony.
Tell me more about that.
So too many leaders make the mistake of thinking that silence means agreement, or they don't even bother to check. Does everybody here on my team truly support the direction that we're going? Do they support this decision that I've made? Do they understand the decision that I've made? When we're working with our executive teams, Sean, and we are slowing them down and the decisions that they're making, it's kind of wild, I think, for usually the CEO to realize and recognize how many people in the room are just like, oh, they're not, either they're not following, they're not keeping up, they're not getting it, or they have strongly held opinions that don't support the CEO's decision or direction, and they have all of the insecurities stopping them from speaking up. So artificial harmony is the belief. We're like pretending that we agree when actually we do not. And so the reason that diversity is part of our model, it's one of the 4 traits, right? Because there's maturity, diversity, community, and unity. We have diversity in there because we want to make sure that teams are willing to consider different perspectives. And yes, include people from different backgrounds and all of that on the way to get ultimately to unity. I really see this is an oversimplification as are all models, but it really does start from the left with maturity and it grows into unity. But without the artificial stuff. I mean, most people know the experience of being in a meeting and people are sort of like nodding their heads. Okay. And then in the hallway, it's like, I'm not doing that. Or like, that's never going to work, right? Like this happens. Or nowadays, people are on Zoom and then they're like chatting each other. They're not speaking out loud in the meeting to say what they really think, but they're chatting each other like, well, this isn't going to work. So a lot of the work that we do, and this is part of what came up from our work with NASA, is how do we create enough psychological safety inside the teams to ensure that if there is dissension, people have dissenting opinions, dissenting ideas, different perspectives, they will bring them up. So the team can spend more time slowing down is a big part of it, to ensure that we've heard all those different voices and that we're considering all the perspectives on our way to unity.
So I've seen this in a few companies, and personally, and so tactically speaking, I guess if you're, a senior or middle manager, and you think, what's the balance? Because what I've also seen is sometimes it's like, God, we're not going anywhere because like every decision, all 15 middle managers need to get their say in and give their opinion. Everyone's in, and it's just back and forth. And it's like, well, we just talked for an hour and a half in a meeting and got nowhere. So we're just going to be here again. And eventually, leadership's like, well, deadline's here. We're doing this anyway. Right. So like it's too much versus maybe you think you think people are able to give their opinion, but they're not. And you're kind of steamrolling them. Like, what are some tactics or I guess 2 things. One, as a leader, how do we know? Like, how do we know if we're doing it right or if we're going too far on either side? And then how do we pull it back to, tactics to pull it back to where we have that right balance between collaboration and feeling psychological safety, but actually moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh gosh. Okay. So multiple things to unpack. So let me start with, I'm going to talk about this concept that's called concordance. And concordance I learned about it specifically through a program called The Human Element, which is amazing. It was life-changing for me. And it's at the core of a lot of the work that we do with our clients. And so concordance comes from the Latin of concor, which is with heart, with heart. So concordance is a step beyond consensus. And concordance says that, and this is where a lot of leaders get super uncomfortable, Sean. So anybody listening, I will just say, like, just hang with me for a moment and play this out. Concordance says that everybody has equal decision-making power at the table. And you're going to include the people in the decision who know the most about the decision being made and also who are most impacted by the decision. Most organizations leave this step out. And so there's these criteria around inclusion, control, and openness. And there's something called the yes method. This is every single person who's included in the decision is going to give a yes or no as the team is making a decision. And that can be making a decision along the way to the bigger decision, right? Like we might be able to come up with some options and then rule some options out. But each decision along the way, we want to check in with concordance. And the yes method says that I'm going to hear from every single person. I'm going to write the decision down so we're clear what we're deciding on. And then I'll poll. I'm looking for a yes or a no. Go all the way around. Now, here's the key. Somebody says, yeah, that's fine. That's a no. If they say, sure, anything other than a yes is considered a no. And even if they say, yes, that's a no, because what we're looking for is with heart. We are looking to see, can they, without any hesitation, support with heart? Yes, I support this decision. And so literally taking that poll helps you know where people stand. It's actually very hard for people to truly fake complete alignment and agreement with something. It's really actually hard for them. Some people can do it. Like some people really can fake with the best of them. But most of the time, if they actually do care, they're going to struggle to say yes if they're not fully bought in. And so that's where we get to the expectation of openness, which says, if you are anything other than a yes, then you get the floor. You get to speak. And it's not just that you get to, but there's an expectation that you speak. So you're not allowed to just disagree, but not get into why. We want to hear from you. And so and there's so much more that I could say about concordance, but as a tactic, even if you don't want to give away full decision-making authority, I think a leader can ask for verbal agreement from every person and ask for that yes versus yeah. And then some of it is about paying attention to the gut. If somebody's like, yes, do you feel something? Is there any sense there of I'm not sure if they're fully bought in? And just hold space for them to raise their true thoughts and opinions in the meeting.
Yeah, I think that the ability to make decisions, I think it's really interesting because my thoughts are in the passive, and there's sort of two things, I should come up with a better word than things, two things that leaders can never delegate, right? And it's so interesting we're talking about them in this context because to me it's culture and decision-making. Mm. Ultimately, you have to make, it comes down to someone has to own it and own the responsibility. But this construct of everyone getting a wholehearted yes, 100% yes, and then if not, introducing, more discussion around that. And, I guess what I've found is that, I love the way you brought that up because just allowing someone to feel heard and feel that their input matters. It doesn't, if you've got 5 opinions about how to do something, obviously 4 or 5, we're not doing what they think is the right decision because, we can only go one direction and you're not going to get, 100% agreement on everything. Or if you do, every time you're probably in danger of that groupthink, or, that's maybe a trigger that you have that going on. So it's how do you, ultimately you have to make the decision, but just giving people the power and the psychological safety to be heard gets them bought into the final decision, hopefully, right?
Yeah. And so, concordance is not something that I would recommend for every decision that's made inside the context of an organization. And the funny thing is that the leader is the one that actually decides if the decision will be made concordantly or if they're going to retain decision-making ability. And so in my opinion, they are in fact retaining that decision-making control. And the reason that I will push leaders to do it at least once, give it a shot on something that's really vital. As an example, we were working with a client a few years ago, and they wanted to create a very clear priority number one? So not like these are our 17 priorities, but like, no, what is the number one thing? And it doesn't mean nothing else happens, but it means if there's any question about what to prioritize in terms of time and resources, there's no question. We know what number one is. And that's it. We don't have to figure out 2, 3, 4, 5 right now. Let's just figure out number one. And so we were with this executive team and they were making a decision of all of the priorities, all of the different initiatives that they had going on, what was number one. And Sean, do you have any guesses how many hours this team met in order to come to full concordance? They had 11 leaders on the team.
4 hours.
It took 8. And it was over 2 days. So we started in the afternoon and we finished it up the next morning. And this terrifies leaders. It terrifies them. They're like, I cannot spend 8 hours on a decision. But here's what people often forget about humans. If I am not fully bought into something, even if I'm not trying to be a bad employee, even if I want to be a good steward of the organization, I am not going to be giving the same degree of effort toward that direction. I'm just not. And so we ask leaders to look at decision-making as not just making the decision, and that's the time that it takes, but consider the time to make the decision as well as the time to actually implement and execute that decision. When you look at that whole thing, all of a sudden, it's much faster to use Concordance, especially for the very big decisions. And as a bonus, to your point from earlier, everybody feels heard, which is amazing. The level of clarity and understanding that the team has too about like everything going on in the workforce is huge. And then the other piece that I get really excited about, Sean, is that usually when you're really pushing a team to use Concordance, other stuff comes out too. For example, somebody might say, Sean, I have a story in my head that you're really wanting this initiative over here to be the top priority because you've put so much effort into it so far. And I think that you're actually deriving some of your feeling of importance in the organization from that initiative. And while I think that's amazing, I'm not sure it's actually what's best for the company as a whole right now. Like they're able to have those mature conversations where they can help people see how sometimes our ego gets in the way. I mean, more than sometimes. Our ego gets in the way all the time. But that becomes, right? Like all the time. And so that becomes part of the conversation. So Concordance also works best when you've done some self-awareness work and you've really gotten into that maturity strand of our model, which is all that self-acceptance, self-awareness, and self-accountability work.
Yeah. All right. So perfect segue because that was, I did the self-acceptance quiz that you have. I'll put that link in the show notes here. Everyone needs to go and do it. And so I'm actually going to pull it up because I had it here and I closed it. But I landed into pushing but pressured, and this is something that is congruent with my own self-awareness, and something that I'm working on. But I'll tell you that. Well, let me ask first. What are you going to say to someone who shows up as pushing but pressured, someone who's, high in self-improvement, but maybe low in self-acceptance?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that I still find myself there sometimes. And, I work all the time to get more into that flowing and growing, which is high self-acceptance and high self-improvement. So self-acceptance, as you know, Sean, because we've chatted about this, I am so passionate about it. And it's one of the most misunderstood ideas. So I have no doubt that the people listening to your show are high on self-improvement. Like that's why they're listening, right? They're always looking for how they can grow and improve. And a lot of those people that I call them high achievers, they have this belief that they need to beat up on themselves. They need to be really self-critical in order to grow and develop. I certainly believed that. I believed that for years. I thought this was a necessary condition. In fact, a lot of high achievers believe that self-acceptance and self-improvement are opposites. Like I can choose to either accept myself or I can improve myself. And so this is where paradox theory becomes crucially important. And paradox theory says you can have two dimensions that seem like maybe they're in contrast, but actually upon closer examination, you see there's nuance and they coexist. And so we place it on like an XY axis, self-acceptance and self-improvement. So you can see that they coexist. And that's where you get the 2x2. Consultants, we love our 2x2s. So this matrix, if you do the quiz, which is just like selfacceptancequiz.com, is going to place you somewhere in one of those 4 boxes. So you can be high or low on self-acceptance and you could be high or low on self-improvement. And so what I would say to people who are in that pushing but pressured area is you can focus on self-improvement from a self-judging lens, or you can focus on self-improvement from a self-accepting lens. Because self-acceptance and self-improvement aren't opposites. The opposite of self-acceptance is self-judgment, and you don't need it to grow and improve. So that myth is the most important thing that I always want to say to people that end up in that pushing but pressured box.
Yeah, because I mean, this dichotomy is hitting really home with me. It's something I've been working on through a lens of conscious leadership and that model. And I've got I would say the vast majority of the executive coaching clients that I work with, when I have conversations around this, it's similar. And it's this idea of, do you have worth just being you? Like, are you worthy?
Yep.
Not because you produce something or provide or impact. And I'll tell you that I struggle with this, viewing it as sort of as mutually exclusive or a dichotomy, whatever word you want to use, because I do think there's a sense that as human beings, I guess let me know your thoughts on this if I'm right or if you think I'm looking at this wrong. We're tribal creatures, right? Like that's who we are. We can't exist without a tribe and relationships and interactions. And so I think that genetically, fulfillment, we've been designed to experience fulfillment by how we positively impact others. And so sometimes it does feel like when they're like, well, do you love yourself? Do you feel worthy not doing anything but just breathing? Seems in my head, I'm like, well, seems like a waste. Like if someone just did that, like I would have a very low opinion of them. And I don't think they would, I don't know if I could feel fulfillment if I just completely sat in that extreme. So how would you define that construct?
I think this is such an important point. And so one of the things I want to say about this, in this 2x2, so of all the people that have taken the quiz, I've never, ever had somebody land high self-acceptance and low self-improvement. Not a single person. And I think that speaks to the power of self-acceptance. I'm not saying that like you can't score that way, like somebody certainly could, but to the extent that this abbreviated quiz is capturing something real here, when somebody is high on self-acceptance, they are so intrinsically motivated to be in service to others. That is the nature of self-acceptance. And so it's, again, like, I get so excited about like paradox theory and everything because it feels so counterintuitive sometimes. But the more okay you are with who you are right now, regardless of what's happening around you, regardless of who you happen to be with in that moment, the more effective you're going to be at literally whatever it is you're trying to do. And so the idea that somebody's going to feel worthy even if they're not doing anything, okay, yes, that does mean they're not going to do something though. It's the fact that like everybody can be fickle. And if your self-worth is based on somebody else being happy, you're giving away too much power because they have their own stuff. And there's so much more I can say there, but I'll pause.
Yeah. So it's just bringing up two concepts for me, here. And one is, you just mentioned at the end, the giving away your power, right? Like if you're saying my only worth comes from not just me providing, and maybe that's the difference, right? Like not just me providing or serving or giving or being of use, but it's of how is that perceived? Like is the praise coming from the other direction? If I'm depending my own self-worth on that, now I'm giving away the power of how I, judge myself. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And because everybody's always going through stuff, right? Everybody meets fighting a battle you know nothing about. And so if I am basing my self-worth on getting appreciation from them in whatever form I might want to receive it, and I don't get it from them, and I internalize that as a sign that I am now unworthy, that's extremely problematic for humanity. And it's what happens all the time. Like it happens a ton. And I think when a lot of people are on a journey of healing and growth, that's when they start to realize and recognize like, wow, I am far too dependent on what somebody else might think or feel in order to feel good about me. And so when I talk about the quiz, your results can totally change depending on what's going on. So it's not like if you take it once, like that's it, you're locked in. And the goal is, what if it didn't change? What if you were high on self-acceptance and high on self-improvement and you stayed there no matter what's happening, no matter if you've just had a failure, experienced a setback, made a mistake, disappointed somebody, faced rejection. What if all of those things can happen around you and you still feel okay with who you are? That is the magic. That makes
That's
you...
true resilience, right?
Yes, I was just going to say that makes you
Yeah.
so resilient. It
Yeah.
does. Because life is going to throw you challenges all the time. And unfortunately, people, like I said, they can be very fickle. People have their own insecurities. Somebody who doesn't appreciate you for something that you've done has nothing to do with you. Other people's behavior is not about you. That's one of the key things that we get into when we're helping our clients really understand self-acceptance. Other people's behavior is not about you. That's about them.
And, I try to, and maybe I think this is I want to say it's eternal battle. Maybe not. Hopefully not, right? Hopefully it's not. But is this concept around, can I still accomplish what I want to accomplish, live the life I want to live, have the impact, have fulfillment, and can I do it driven by love and joy and abundance versus driven by fear and scarcity?
Yes. That's exactly what this is about.
Yeah. So,
And
but it's so foreign to most people because you've gotten to whatever they're at now. I think about athletics, right?
yeah.
A lot of us, or anything, academics, it's like, I need to get these grades so I get into school so I can have this job, so I can do this thing, or I need to practice here because if not, I'm going to fail. It's like and it kind of goes to your book. In your book, you talk about how we're preconditioned to have this negative cognitive bias of like looking at loss and looking at fear as like, we think about that more. And so we're, in some ways, people will use that as like a crutch and an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And they see it as the only way for them to drive forward. But I don't know, how do we switch that mindset to start asking those questions and start experiencing a different way to drive us forward?
Yeah, so that you're describing survival mode, and that is the default mode. We come here onto this planet and we have an instinct to survive. We want to survive. And so if you're truly in a survival situation, fear is the exact driver that you want. Like that's what you want at that point. That fear is biologically, chemically in your body. Things are changing to help you to be in that fight, flight, whatever it is that you need to literally survive. When you're not in a survival situation, it's very different. If you bring that survival mindset and that fear-based, scarcity-based mindset into a situation where we're not actually talking about life and death, then it's actually working against you. And so that's one of the key things to recognize is that your brain and your body are fooling you into thinking that you need to be in scarcity. You need fear as the driver in order to survive. You need to remind yourself actually how safe you are and how much you're not about to die as soon as you're out of that thrive, right? From survive to thrive. So that's part of it. And just being able to recognize like this is not a design flaw, it's a feature. It's great that our brains and our bodies do this for us. We just don't apply it.
Well, and I take it as like, you're right. Like, think of it as a gratitude. For me, I always had this foundation of coming back to gratitude of like, I'm glad you bring that up. It's like, we were designed, and, other things I use, like in my one of my speeches, I looked up, there's been estimated 100 billion humans have walked the earth, right? It's like 100 billion of us. And it's like, and the vast majority of those probably were living and survived because they were driven by fear and scarcity, and because they were, in tribes hunting dangerous giant animals with pointy sticks and warring with each other. And like that's how 99.9% of all humans have lived. How lucky are we that we're in this 0.0001% of people that's like in a house with air conditioning, with a society, like all these things. And so it's like this disconnect between the world we were designed for and the world we're living in is now creating these psychological problems we have to overcome. So like
big time. Reminding
ourselves of that, right?
Yeah. And I think what you were referring to earlier is when we were writing in the book about how we're hardwired for discontent. Right. And that, that's a beautiful evolution strategy for us as a species. If we are never content with what is, that means that we will continue to strive and look forward. But this is exactly where paradox theory becomes so important. Because when we invite people to let go of fear and scarcity and self-judgment, and lean in instead to love, abundance, and self-acceptance, that desire to improve doesn't go away. We're so afraid. High achievers are so afraid that we're going to lose it. But you are motivated. I bet you are, Sean. And I can ask you first. I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but
sorry, go ahead. I can edit it out if I may.
I didn't like that. Okay, so if you didn't have fear as a motivator for you, what else do you think would still drive you to want to improve and grow?
I think gratitude for what for what I have. And I didn't create this society. I didn't create this safety. I didn't create any of it. I was just born into it. Also, the people in my life who sacrificed to continue to provide me opportunity, that would drive me to want to, give back. And then I think also just, and part of that is I think there's an inherent gratitude or appreciation or love or sanctity for life itself, maximizing the experience of life itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So there can be this I just want to continue to make things better. A sense of wanting to give back, right? Having that gratitude and wanting to pay it forward. I think what we talked about earlier, having a clear vision of the future is huge. You've been through that, Sean, right? Where you paint a vision of the future of what something can be and it triggers this excitement in you. You're like, man, wouldn't that be cool? That's a huge driver. And the learning process, most of us understand that feeling of learning and finding joy in the process. Some stuff I've learned, I'm like, I wish I didn't have to learn this right now. And there's been so many things that as I'm learning, I'm like, that is so cool. And I want to learn for the joy of it. And so helping people recognize that your desire to grow and improve isn't going anywhere just because you're choosing to let go of the fear and the self-judgment and the scarcity.
Yeah. I love this. I love this stuff. This is great, content, something I've continued to work on, and I've learned a lot. So let's talk about in organizations, right? Because you have this inside out theory, which I agree with, right? Which, simply basically is just starts with self and then goes to team, then goes to organizational culture, just for everyone that's listening. And I agree with them. We've talked about this self-acceptance, all these things. We've talked about, improvement. And you talk about, for me, the backbone of every intentional leadership development program I've been a part of, all the way from, scouts, right, as a kid to going to West Point to anything, it always started with character development. Integrity and character is the backbone of leader development. And self-development, and this self-development is the key to inside out there. I have not gone to a company or worked with leaders who are trying to develop better leaders and managers where they're doing character training, where they're doing integrity training, where they even, is this even the role? Is it reasonable for us to have an expectation that our business managers have an obligation to help people develop to better human beings?
Is it reasonable? I would say it's desirable. In the missing links culture model that you referenced earlier, there's the culture traits, but we acknowledge that organizations are groups of individual humans. And so the other piece of the model is, what are the fundamental drivers? I love talking about this as forget the carrot and the stick in terms of motivating people. Motivation truly comes from within. It only comes from within. Accountability only comes from within. And the fundamental human drivers, I think it's chapter 2 that we talk about this. There is so much research that gets into what are the things that we are hardwired to want as human beings, and we're born with it, and it doesn't go away. Defense mechanisms might come in and shadow it a little bit, but the very first one in our model is growth. We are all fundamentally driven to want to grow. It's baked into our DNA. And so if you're working in an organization that doesn't provide any of that, you're never going to get the best that you can out of your workforce.
Well, and also, right, you end up, now that I saw it in business and MBA land, right, we all learn right off the bat is the Peter principle. Everyone gets promoted to their level of incompetence, right? It's you're good at this job, so you get promoted, and then if you're good at that job, you get promoted until you're not really that good enough to be promoted. So you just have every level. So it's if you're not setting a way for your people to grow, are you actually developing more capable leaders, or are you just promoting the least incompetent person in each role to the next level because they've been there long enough?
Yeah. Based on tenure. I don't know.
Yeah.
And, there's this parable, and I'm sure that it was based on an actual story at one point in time, but the parable between the CEO and the CFO, where the CEO wants to develop the workforce, wants to invest in their development and growth. And the CFO says, well, what if we invest in them and develop them and they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, I'm not big on shoulds for people. I don't want to tell leaders what they should do. I would say that the research is pretty clear that if you invest in the development of your folks, it's going to have a positive impact on your culture overall. So I won't say that they should. I think that it's in their interest if they're wanting to create a workforce of people that are engaged and loyal and actually performing at their peak.
There's a great question that recently a mentor of mine brought up because when I frame my conversations around the work I do around leader development and helping companies retain and attract top talent. And then later on, after I came with it, this mentor said one of his favorite questions to ask, these leaders is, so you want top talent, right? Everybody wants A players. Everybody wants great people on their team, right? Like everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
Said, okay, so outside of compensation, why does top talent want to work for you?
Did you? Do you want me to answer that, or do you?
Yeah. Like, no, I'm just saying, like I'm hearing you say is like it's like if you're developing them, because you mentioned that's like an inherent driver for humanity. So it's like if you're helping them grow, they're going to want to stay. Like top talent's going to want to grow, right?
Yes, absolutely. And my other maybe bigger answer to that question too is how does that person, that top talent, how do they feel about themselves in your presence?
Good one. Now you're talking about like it really is. Yeah. How do they feel? How do they feel when they're in your presence?
How do they feel about themselves when they're in your presence? So leaders who lead with fear as a motivator, like they're like, sometimes you got to use fear to motivate. I'm like, well, it is a tool and it gets you perhaps very short-term results. It doesn't usually give you long-term results. And so over time, you're not going to have the results that you're looking for if fear is your primary tool to motivate people. And so if you're using like that fear of like, you're going to feel judged if you're not doing the things that I want you to do, and they don't feel good about themselves in your presence, and they might be like scrambling, trying to get that sense of approval from you, you're never going to get as much out of that person as the person who actually feels like they matter to you, like you believe in their abilities, and that you just generally like them, right? Or regard them with warmth. We talk about it in our world. We use a theory that says all humans want to feel significant, competent, and likable. And so what are the things that you as a leader can do so that the people that are working for you, it's easier for them to feel like they matter, like you trust them and you like them. And all of that, just to circle back, is much easier when you actually feel those things about yourself, which is that self-acceptance.
Yes, yeah. Modeling that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So what a leader wants to do, they want people to feel that. What are the first things they can do to help increase the probability that the people will feel that way around?
Okay, so significance is about including them. So like pay attention to them, get to know them as a human being. Like get to know who they are. This is part of why leadership is so difficult, I think, is because truly effective leaders are creating very powerful relationships with each of the people that are following them. And depending on the scope of your team, that can be a lot of folks. So yeah, pay attention to them, get to know them as a human being. Doesn't have to be like all their personal life stuff. It can be, but what do they like? What do they not like? How do they, what kind of work do they enjoy? Just get to know them, spend time with them, actually listen to them. This is still the number one thing that I'm working on as a leader is like making sure that I am listening well when it comes to like our own decision making. As far as competence, the best way to earn trust is to give it. So if you want somebody to feel competent in your presence, then you want to show them that you will give them some degree of control. What are you delegating to them? Are you asking for their input? If you never ask for somebody's input on something, they're going to think that you don't care about their opinion. So how can you empower them? How can you give them that trust by giving them some control over some piece of the work? And then when it comes to likability, the biggest thing that you can do is be authentic. Be willing to be vulnerable. It doesn't have to be like full balls to the wall kind of vulnerability, but like, be open. Let your guard down. Share something about yourself as a human being, and they'll likely do the same. And that's where you can create that feeling of connection. Those are my like quick tips for each of those. There's depth in every one of them. But.
No, yeah, and this is we could fight this for we could do a full like Joe Rogan 3 hours on this and keep going. I'm sure because I love this. But I'll let you go because we're about running out of time. Dr. Laura Gallaher, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the work you're doing and all the wisdom that you shared with everybody here today. When they want to, when listeners want to find you, get in contact with you, learn more, the best way to do that.
So the quiz is probably great, right? selfacceptancequiz.com, because we'll be in touch via email after that. You'll get a report and I'll send some coaching emails based on the results that you got. And the next best place would be LinkedIn. just tell me that you heard me here on Sean's podcast if you want to connect. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that came up or just, welcome you into the circle.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate it. And I look forward to hopefully having a conversation again soon.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for being a part of the No Limit Leadership family. This isn't just a podcast. We're building a movement of no limit leaders driven to unlock our greatness and lead the world forward. If this made you think or gave you something useful, please, 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 right now, go hit follow and then share it with one leader you believe in. Challenge limits, develop leaders, fuel greatness.